So despite this tool being heavily marketed towards streamers, I'm not a streamer. I don't do Twitch streaming and stuff like that. I don't play Fortnite and all that stuff. However, I'm a programmer and I love video editing. And of course, I work in front of a desk for my day-to-day job. And this has been immensely helpful. This tool has changed the way I actually interact with my computer. And I'm really excited to show you all my hacks and tricks and tips near the end of this video. The first thing I do want to talk about is comparing it with the very well-known competitor, the Elgato Streamdeck. And this is the Mark II version. So we'll go into the differences, unbox this one, and then later towards the end, I'm going to show you how you can write your own scripts using ChatGPT to really take this to the next level and turbocharge your productivity. Let's get right into it. Now, the first thing I want to mention is that as soon as I unbox this, I really felt like the Razer, the Stream Controller X felt a lot more premium. Just the unboxing experience, just how it felt, everything was just felt more solid than the actual Elgato. Now, in terms of the actual tangible differences, the first one you're going to notice is the buttons feel a lot better to press. When I press this, it just doesn't feel as mushy as the Elgato Streamdeck. And to me, that was one of the most annoying things with the Elgato Streamdeck. I just really hated how when you tap the buttons, it just didn't feel very comfortable and whatnot. All right, here's my first impression of pressing it. Definitely less wiggle and just nicer to press on. They did a really good job in making the buttons on here feel just a little bit more tactile. Another big difference between these two controllers is that this one has a magnetic cover that's really easy to take off, so you can customize it. I know you can probably do that with the Elgato Streamdeck, but it just wasn't very intuitive. And of course, attaching this to the base plate was just a very nice experience because it uses magnets as well. The other one, the Elgato Streamdeck, just kind of felt more flimsy and whatnot. Another thing I really liked about the Stream controller was the actual USB cable that it came with. It has a really cool textured feeling to it. It's very hard to describe it. The texture looks just very cool on the USB cable. This is a very minor point, I know. And the actual USB cable has a USB-C connection on one side. And if you look on the USB-A side, it has a nice green kind of decal to it to match with the Razer theme. So I think that looks just very nice, but that's a minor point. I'm very happy that both of these are detachable. So that is very, very important. If you often got to take this from one computer to another computer, you're going to plug it in. It's nice to not have this just a wire attached to it. It's very nice that it's detachable. Now, the obvious similarities between the two is that they feel very comparable in size and in terms of weight. So there's not much big difference here. I think the Razer is a tad smaller. Both devices have the same number of buttons and their display technology is more or less the same. They're very nice to see in any type of condition. Now, there are two fundamental things that I like about the Razer Stream Controller X. The first thing is that I like that the bottom base is a lot stickier. It has this nice kind of, nano adhesive that really prevents the base from moving. So every time you press the button on the actual Stream controller, it's not going to move around, unlike the Elgato Streamdeck, which was notorious for that. It had basically no friction. It would always move around. So I like that it's a lot stickier and it's reusable. Obviously, it's not going to stick to your desk. It's just a different type of friction adhesive. Another nice difference with the Razer controller is that if you want to lie it flat, it just performs a lot better than the Elgato version. It just doesn't move as much. It has a more natural feeling to it when you lie it next to your keyboard. And then the viewing angles on the display is a lot nicer. So you can actually see what the buttons are actually saying. Whereas on the Stream Deck, it wasn't as nice to see the actual display when it was lying flat and it moved around more. So overall, in terms of build quality and the feel of it, I have to say I'll give a slight edge to the Razer, although both of them are more or less the same. So you're not going to see too much. The main difference is that the Razer has a much better base because it doesn't move around when you press on it. I also like how Razer's Stream controller has a more subtle logo, whereas on the Elgato Streamdeck, you can see that there's just white text on a black plastic. So let's quickly talk about the software, and I'm going to give you a quick tour of it. First of all, when you install this, it's going to ask you to install Razer Synapse. Now, it's kind of weird that they asked you to install that because I installed it, but then it also installs Loopdeck, which is the actual software that controls the controller. And what I noticed is that you don't really need Razer Synapse to be running in the background. In fact, I've never had it running. I just had Loopdeck running. So I'm not sure why they make you install it, but it's nice that you don't need to have an extra software running in the background and you can just have the Loopdeck software, which controls this device. So that's a nice touch. Now, in terms of the software between the two devices, I have to say they're more or less the same. I'm going to give a slight edge to the Razer software because I find it a little bit more intuitive. The buttons are just a little bit bigger. The ways that you can control, for example, if you want to control the text for a specific icon, you can move it around. Whereas with the Elgato Streamdeck, it was a little bit more cumbersome. You had to change the font size. So everything just feels a little bit more I don't know, more user friendly when it comes to customizing your buttons. And that's one of the things that you'll spend a lot of time is actually programming all these buttons, because trust me, there's an infinite amount of buttons, especially that you have dynamic profiles. What that means is that, let's say you switch to Adobe Premiere, or maybe you go to your IDE for programming, the buttons are going to automatically reassign to that specific application so that you have more contextualized icons. So there's an infinite amount of possibilities. You can scroll through different pages, you can go back, you can go forward. So there's so much customization. It's going to take a while to set up, but trust me, once you set it up, you'll never go back to using very esoteric key commands and stuff like that. You're gonna love the customization, the ability to be more productive by just pressing a single button to do many, many types of actions. Now, when you compare the type of actions or types of functionality, for example, being able to look at plugins, third-party plugins on their marketplace, being able to install icons and add extra functionality. In terms of all that stuff, I haven't really seen any major differences between the two softwares, between Streamdeck and the Razer software, which is really nice, because then that way you don't really miss anything if you choose one platform or the other. And what I really like about it is they give you so many types of options. Like you can run custom applications, you can run macros, key commands, you can create keyboard shortcuts and stuff like that. You can even get access to more function keys on your keyboard. Did you know that from F1 to F12, that's typically on your keyboard, there's actually F13 all the way to F24. So you have so many ways of building all these actions and icons and all this stuff, so that you basically have no restrictions on how far you want to go with this type of thing. Now, this device is what the MacBook Touch Bar should have been. The amount of customization you get is absolutely amazing. So you might be wondering, why even bother investing in one of these devices? Why can't I use my own keyboard, my keyboard shortcuts? Am I using all the keyboard shortcuts on my current keyboard? Maybe I can get a bigger keyboard instead of those really small ones. Maybe you can buy a really cheap macro keyboard, which is just like a numpad and doesn't change UIs and stuff. Another option is you can use an omnipresent search bar, which is something like Raycast or Alfred for the Mac OS, or Windows Power Tools Launch Bar, which can trigger any type of action. So you can create a shortcut to an action and you can bind it to a macro and call it. Well, the thing with that is, if you're going to be using an omnipresent search bar and you want to type in a command, let's say you want to import a bunch of footage, automatically sync from one folder into another, like in Premiere Pro. In order to do that, you have to hit a key command and then type the command. So there's a lot of steps involved versus just going and pressing a button. So that already is one big advantage. Where I see this being very useful is there's a sweet spot in terms of what type of action you're doing, how frequently it is. So on one spectrum, you have actions that you perform all the time. For example, let's say you're video editing and you're cutting clips. So you're going to use, for example, in my case, the X command to cut clips. It makes no sense to bind that to an actual external device like a controller or whatever you're using. And let's say you have other actions on the other side of the spectrum that are very infrequently used, very seldomly used. For example, you want to export a video. So you're going to maybe do that once a week, for example. So what I find that these types of devices, these little controller decks, they're very useful when you have an action that's right in the middle. So that's something that you don't use so frequently that you should actually commit to muscle memory, like a keyboard shortcut, and then avoid the actions that you do maybe once in a while, like once a week, once a day, or whatever like that. So these actions, you use them maybe every 10 minutes, once an hour, and you don't want to commit to memory all these actions because they're not super used very often, but they're also used enough that you also want to make them a little bit faster. I think this is where this device hits the sweet spot in terms of where you're going to be using it. Now, you might argue, it's like, why can't I go on Amazon and buy a cheap macro pad? Well, those things are not very useful at all. First of all, they're very, very hard to program. You have to install third-party software. What's nice about this is that you don't have to install like kind of sketchy software. So you can just program it all with Loopdeck. And another thing is that they don't change, their images don't change based on the application you're using. They don't recontextualize to whatever application you're using. So in Premiere Pro, you might bind it to a set of actions, but then if you switch to Windows, you don't know what those actions are doing. So it can be very confusing. That's one of the things where keyboard shortcuts can be very, very hard to memorize if you don't use the action very, very often. Like I said, on one spectrum, if you use the action all the time, it makes sense to bind it to a keyboard shortcut. But if you do this activity, like your video edit once a week, it's very, very hard to remember all these key commands and then commit it to memory and then keep it in memory because you're not going to be doing these actions by definition all the time. So to summarize this point, yes, there are cheaper alternatives. You can use a software-based solution like an omnipresent search bar or launch bar, or you can use a cheap macro keyboard. But I find that those solutions are not very helpful. And one particular thing that this Razer Stream Controller X is very useful at is when you're multitasking. And that goes in the name of streaming. So if you're streaming and you're talking to an audience like right now, and I want to quickly switch between scenes, like maybe I want to make my face smaller on the screen and show my desktop, this is very helpful. Here's an example of an OBS profile where you can see there's a record button, so I don't need to look at the screen or switch different apps just to be able to start recording, and I can switch between different scenes. You can see my face is there. This is almost like a secondary monitor. It's like a pseudo monitor. You can have things like the timer countdown. Let's say you're doing a Zoom presentation and you don't want to go more than 5 minutes. Well, you can press this button and you can create a quick timer so that after 5 minutes it makes a noise or something like that. So it goes beyond what just like those kind of more old school solutions do. This is very versatile, and it's going to give you a lot more possibilities to customize and really improve the experience of using your computer. So you can see that Loupedeck offers some basic functionality in terms of programming. You can send keyboard shortcut combinations, you can do time macros, you can add delays and all that stuff. And all that stuff is fine and dandy. However, there is a much better solution, especially if you're on Windows. And it's called just basic scripting. And the scripting language I really recommend on the Windows platform is something called Autohotkey. Autohotkey is like scripting but on steroids. Basically, you can pretty much move your mouse, type key commands, send keyboard shortcuts, all through a very simple scripting language. And what's best of all is that you can actually use ChatGPT, and I do recommend version 4.0, so get the premium subscription. And you can just ask it in natural language like, hey, can you make a Windows Autohotkey script and then send a bunch of commands. So for example, you want to send Control Alt, you can make it send a series of commands, or you can have it click on specific things, or you can have it click on a specific pixel like an image. You can do a lot more complicated things than what you typically would do in a Loupedeck software or Streamdeck software. And the best thing about this is that it's in a script. So that means it's portable and you can commit it to a GitHub repository. So this makes the experience of creating these more elaborate scripts a lot easier and more trackable, because you can track your changes in your script. If you're not a programmer, I still think you should really try this, because it's so easy to create scripts by speaking in natural language when you talk to ChatGPT 4.0. So if you're on Mac OS and you don't have access to Autohotkey, you can use different types of software. For example, Alfred is a really good programming interface where you can create workflows. So once you created your workflow in Alfred, for example, you can bind one of these buttons to that workflow by calling the command. So basically this makes scripting a lot easier. You can use your typical programming languages like Ruby or Python, and you can call that script from your actual Streamdeck controller. So this enhances the productivity. You can call APIs and whatnot, calls API integrations. All these low code or no code solutions are out there, and it's all configurable from this device. So you don't have to be restricted to just the traditional macros and stuff like that. In fact, if my script is more complicated, I much prefer to use Autohotkey or an Alfred workflow or any other type of scripting language that makes it just a lot more versatile and easier to use. I want to show some practical examples on how I use Razer's Stream Controller on a daily basis. Now let's start with something simple and then move to something more complex. So I often need to sync my important project files from my local drive to my network attached storage. And I prefer to do this syncing manually, since backing up should only happen once I'm done video editing my project. So I just press this convenient button which runs the command to back up all my files, which has been amazing because I never forget to do it. By the way, investing in a network attached storage, or NAS, was one of the best decisions I made, since I'm just saving so much money not paying Google Drive or Dropbox subscription fees. Now the model I'm using is called the Asustor Drivestor 2 Pro, and I actually made a full review about it. So if anyone's interested in getting a NAS, I really do think you should check it out. I will leave a link in the description to it. Now this NAS has been amazing. It's small, quiet, and very easy to set up, and it really gives me that peace of mind that all my important memories and very critical project files are all backed up without paying tons of fees to Google for life. Anyways, let's go back into the examples. So I have a little bit more complicated one. Now, unfortunately, as a PC and Android user, I don't get the same benefits as those who are part of the Apple ecosystem when it comes to switching your AirPods from your phone to your computer. So I ended up creating a Windows Autohotkey script that automates all this, and then I can bind it to my Razer controller. So this little button will do all the work of enabling Bluetooth on Windows, physically move my mouse to click on the AirPods to connect to it, and then change the sound output for the operating system to the AirPods. By the way, I will share all these scripts in the description so you can tweak or be inspired to write your own, of course with the help of ChatGPT. The last script is one of my favorites, and there's so much more, but I can't go through all of them, but this one has saved me so much time. So with a simple press of the button on my controller, I can run a script that automatically imports footage right into my Premiere Pro project. This has saved me so much time. So let's say, for example, I take a screenshot. The screenshot will save to some part of my local drive. Now, what's really cool about this is that the script is smart enough to know what current Premiere project folder I'm in, and then move the assets to that project folder, and then import it by moving the mouse and clicking on the special button, and then automatically highlighting that clip. So there are endless possibilities out there. For example, I was able to automate posting one post to Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, Kijiji, all from one script. So I don't have to like click on a bunch of different websites and whatnot. This all can be done with ChatGPT and Autohotkey or whatever your favorite scripting language you prefer. So to wrap up this video, I have to say the Razer Stream Controller X is a worthy competitor to the Elgato Streamdeck Mark II. In fact, I think it's so good that I do recommend it just because of the build quality. The physical form factor is just a little bit nicer, and more or less the same price. Now, in terms of turbocharging your productivity, I hope I convinced you that using ChatGPT custom scripts can extend well beyond what the Loupedeck software offers. Not just the basic macros, but you can just do so much more, and it can really customize your work experience, as I've shown in the previous examples. So if you want to check it out, I'll leave links in the description. And if you have any questions or comments, please let me know, and I'll be very, very happy to answer. See you in the next video.